I didn't confront my son when he slipped something into my backpack. I didn't freeze. I didn't even look at him. I let him zip it up. I let him smile. I let him pat my shoulder and say, "Be careful out there, Dad." Because the moment his fingers left that zipper, I knew one thing with terrifying clarity. Whatever he'd just hidden inside my backpack was meant to end my life as I knew it. Not metaphorically, legally, permanently. I felt the weight the second I lifted the bag. Too heavy, too solid, too wrong to be anything innocent. And I also knew something else. My son wasn't nervous because he felt guilty. He was nervous because he thought I hadn't noticed. That was his mistake. I walked out the door like everything was normal. The morning sun was warm, birds loud, the world painfully ordinary for what was about to happen next. I made it half a block before I stopped, slid the backpack off my shoulder, and opened it. What I saw inside made my blood run cold. I didn't panic. I didn't run. I didn't call anyone. I moved it. Then I went back home, sat down, and waited. Exactly 30 minutes later, there was a hard knock at my door. "Police, if this opening already has your heart racing, do me a small favor right now. Subscribe to the channel and share this story with someone you trust. Stories like this are not just entertainment. They're warnings. And this one was only just beginning. The instinct that never retires." I didn't rush when I felt the weight inside that backpack. That's the thing about instincts. They don't scream. They whisper. And the whisper I heard was the same one that had followed me through decades of prison corridors, late-night incidents, and men who smiled right before they lied. Something wasn't just wrong. Something was planned. I walked like I always did, past the same row of parked cars, the same cracked sidewalk, the same neighbor who waved every morning without really seeing me. To anyone watching, I was just an aging man out for his routine walk. To my son, I was exactly what he needed me to be: predictable. Half a block away, I stopped. I stood there longer than necessary, pretending to stretch my lower back. My heart wasn't racing. That surprised me. What I felt wasn't fear, it was disappointment, the kind that settles deep, where anger should be, but never quite ignites. I opened the backpack slowly. There it was, wrapped tight, sealed, hidden just well enough that someone wanted it to be found later by the wrong hands, at the right moment. My son hadn't acted out of panic. He'd acted with patience. That realization hurt more than what I was looking at. I closed the bag, slipped it back over my shoulder, and turned around. Every step home felt heavier, not because of the weight in the backpack, but because I finally understood something I'd been avoiding for months. The boy I raised was gone. If this story feels uncomfortably real, take a second, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and stay with me. What comes next is where everything truly changes. I opened the front door, already knowing this wasn't going to end quietly. The dinner I should have paid more attention to. The truth is, this didn't start that morning. It started the night before, at a dinner table that felt far too big for just two people. We were eating takeout cheap Chinese food in cardboard boxes because neither of us had the energy to cook. The TV was on in the background, muted, flickering light across the walls where my wife's photos still hung. Ethan barely touched his food. He kept stirring the noodles, lifting them, dropping them back into the box like he was searching for something buried underneath. "Dad," he said finally, without looking up, "I need to ask you something." That alone should have warned me. My son used to ask questions head on. This version of him circled the truth like it might bite. I waited. "I need some help," he said. "Just temporarily." "How temporary?" I asked. He hesitated, long enough that I set my fork down. "Money," he added quickly. "A loan." "How much?" Another pause. His jaw tightened. 40,000. The number landed between us like a dropped plate. I stared at him, trying to recognize the boy I once taught to ride a bike in this same driveway. "That's not temporary," I said carefully. "That's most of what I have." His eyes finally met mine. They were bloodshot, tired, but underneath that something else. Something sharp. "You always say family helps family," he snapped. "I also say honesty matters," I replied. "What's it for?" He stood up so fast his chair scraped the floor. "Forget it," he said. "I'll handle it." He stormed down the hall and slammed his bedroom door. I sat there alone, staring at untouched food, telling myself he was just stressed. Now, standing in my house the next morning, backpack still warm from my shoulder, I realized something painful. That dinner wasn't a request. It was a test, and I had failed to see it. When suspicion turned into certainty, I closed the front door behind me and leaned against it, listening. The house was quiet in that hollow way it gets when something important has already broken, but no one has acknowledged it yet. Somewhere down the hall, I could hear Ethan moving around in his room, slow steps, measured, like he was waiting for something to happen, waiting for me. I didn't open the backpack again right away. I set it on the kitchen table instead, right where my wife used to stack the mail. That felt important, somehow. Like placing evidence at the center of the house, instead of hiding it away. I poured myself a glass of water. My hand didn't shake. That scared me more than if it had. I'd spent most of my life dealing with men who made bad decisions. Some were reckless, some were desperate. But the dangerous ones, they were calm, organized, certain someone else would pay the price. That was what finally clicked. If Ethan had just wanted money, he would have begged harder. If he'd been panicking, he would have rushed. But what he'd done that morning, slipping something into my backpack with practiced ease that wasn't panic, that was confidence. I walked down the hall and stopped outside his bedroom door. I didn't knock. I didn't eavesdrop openly. I just stood there long enough to hear his voice. Low, focused. "Yeah," he said into his phone. "It's already in motion." A pause. "No, he has no idea." Another pause, then a short laugh. Not nervous, relieved. "That's the plan." My chest tightened, not with anger, but with a cold, sinking understanding. This wasn't about borrowing money anymore. This wasn't about addiction or bad luck. My son wasn't asking for help. He was removing an obstacle. And for the first time since he was born, I realized something I never thought I'd have to face. If I didn't act first, I wouldn't walk away from this at all. The decision I couldn't unmake. I didn't burst into his room. I didn't demand answers. I didn't shout his name the way I used to when he was late for school. Because once you understand the shape of a trap, the worst thing you can do is step into it loudly. I walked back into the kitchen and sat down at the table. The backpack rested there between us and the past, quiet, innocent-looking, like it hadn't already changed everything. I stared at it long enough to feel the weight of the years press down on me, the scraped knuckles from teaching him to throw a ball, the nights I stayed up waiting for him to come home, the promises I made to his mother that I'd always protect him. Protection, I realized, had limits. I opened the backpack again. Up close, the package felt colder than it should have. Smooth. Impersonal. Whoever sold it didn't care who went to prison for it, only that someone would. And Ethan had already chosen who that someone would be. Me. That was the moment something inside me hardened, not into hatred, but resolve. I understood the rules now. This wasn't a conversation. It was a contest, and the prize was freedom. I wrapped the package carefully, like evidence, like something that needed to be handled without leaving fingerprints, emotional or otherwise. Then I stood up. I knew exactly where Ethan kept his car keys, exactly where he parked, exactly how long it would take him to make the call he thought would end this. As I walked toward the garage, I felt a strange calm settle over me. I wasn't betraying my son. I was refusing to be destroyed by him, moving the piece he never expected. The garage smelled like oil and dust, familiar, grounding. Ethan's car sat exactly where it always did, angled slightly to the left because he never bothered to straighten the wheels. I stood there for a moment, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator inside the house, the ordinary sounds of a morning that felt anything but ordinary. I didn't rush. I opened the trunk. Inside were the small details of a life still pretending to be normal jumper cables. I bought him years ago, an old hoodie, a gym bag that hadn't been used in months. I lifted the bag slowly, unzipped it, and looked inside. Empty. Perfect. I placed the package deep inside, beneath clothes that still smelled faintly of detergent and sweat. I positioned it so it wouldn't fall out, but also wouldn't be hard to find if someone looked closely. Then I zipped the bag shut. That part mattered. Traps fail when they look staged. I wiped my hands on a rag and closed the trunk. The click echoed louder than it should have, final, in a way that made my chest tighten. I stood there for a second longer, staring at the car. This was the same vehicle I'd helped him buy, the same keys I'd handed him with pride. Now it held the truth he thought he'd buried in my life. Back inside, I returned the backpack to its place by the door. Nothing about it looked different. That was the point. I sat down in my chair and waited, not anxiously, Not angrily, patiently, because I knew my son well enough to understand one final thing. He wouldn't be able to stop himself from making the call. The call I knew was coming. I didn't have to wait long. I was halfway through a cup of coffee when I heard Ethan's bedroom door open. His footsteps were lighter than usual, almost careful, like he didn't want the house itself to notice what he was about to do. I kept my eyes on the television. An old morning show droned on about weather and traffic. Normal life. A cruel contrast. Ethan stopped in the hallway. I could feel him there without looking, standing still, listening, making sure I was distracted. Then I heard the soft tap of his phone screen and the shift in his voice when he spoke. Not loud, not whispering either. Controlled? Yes, he said. I'm ready. A pause. It's in his backpack. He left with it this morning. Another pause. Longer this time. No, he won't check. He never does. My jaw tightened. That one stung more than I expected. I heard him pace. One step, then another. You just need to come now, he continued. Before he gets back. Silence. Then a breath I recognized. Relief. Thank you, he said quietly. I'll stay here. He ended the call and leaned against the wall for a moment, exhaling like a man who believed the worst part was over. That was when I finally understood the full shape of his plan. He wasn't just setting me up. He was erasing me. My retirement, my home, my name, all of it gone in a single phone call. I set my coffee down carefully and stood up. Outside, somewhere down the street, sirens wailed faintly, getting closer. When the door finally opened, the knock wasn't polite. It wasn't curious. It was firm, deliberate, and final, the kind of knock that doesn't ask if you're ready, only if you're home. Ethan stiffened in the hallway. I stood up slowly from my chair, giving my knees time to cooperate, my face carefully neutral. I'd seen this moment from the other side too many times to mistake it for anything else. Dad, Ethan said, forcing concern into his voice. Someone's at the door. I hear it, I replied calmly. I walked past him, close enough to smell his cologne too strong for a weekday morning. His eyes flicked to my backpack by the door. Still there. Still zipped. Still innocent looking. Good. I opened the door. 2 uniformed officers stood on my porch, hands resting near their belts. A third man in plain clothes lingered just behind them, eyes scanning the entryway with practiced ease. Mr. Harris? One officer asked. Yes. We received a report concerning illegal substances connected to this residence. I nodded once and stepped aside. You should come in. Behind me, Ethan rushed forward, all wide eyes and worry. Officers, is something wrong? My father. We'll sort it out, the plainclothes officer said, already stepping inside. The air in the house felt thicker as they moved past the threshold, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Ethan stayed close, hovering, ready to explain, ready to help, ready to watch me fall. I followed them into the living room, my heart steady, my mind clear, because at that moment, I knew something he didn't. The trap wasn't where he thought it was anymore. When confidence started to crack, they went straight for the backpack. Of course they did. One of the officers asked politely if it belonged to me. I nodded and told him he was welcome to check it. My voice didn't betray me. Years of discipline had taught me how to keep my face neutral even when everything inside was screaming. Ethan stood just behind them, arms crossed, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. He tried to look concerned, but I could see the anticipation leaking through the cracks. His eyes never left the backpack. The zipper slid open. Water bottle. Folded jacket. Notebook. Nothing else. The officer paused and checked again, slower this time. He lifted each item, methodical, thorough. Still nothing. A flicker of confusion crossed his face. That's strange, Ethan said too quickly. I saw it. I'm sure of it. The plainclothes officer turned toward him, head tilted slightly. You're certain it was in there? Yes, Ethan replied, nodding hard. This morning. Wrapped in plastic. The room felt suddenly smaller. I watched my son's confidence wobble, not collapse, just wobble. The certainty he'd carried since that phone call began to thin, like ice cracking under weight. The officer closed the backpack and set it down. Well, he said, we're not seeing anything here. Ethan swallowed. Maybe he moved it, he offered, desperation creeping into his voice. The plainclothes officer studied him for a long moment, then spoke calmly. Then we'll need to keep looking. I met my son's eyes then just for a second, and for the first time that day, I saw something new there. Fear. The moment the room turned, the plainclothes officer didn't look at me. He looked at Ethan. "You were very specific on the phone," he said calmly. "Backpack, plastic wrap, quantity." Ethan nodded too fast. "Because I saw it. I was just trying to do the right thing." The officer's eyes narrowed, not accusing, just attentive. "When did you see it?" "This morning," Ethan said, "right before he left." "And you didn't confront him?" the officer asked. Ethan hesitated. "Just a beat." I was scared. That was the crack. The officer turned slightly, addressing his partner. "Let's expand the search." Ethan's head snapped up. "Expand? You mean vehicles?" the officer said. "Common next step." For the first time, Ethan's confidence collapsed completely. His face drained of color, and his mouth opened like he wanted to say something, anything, but no sound came out. "My car?" he finally managed. "Why would you search my car?" the officer answered without raising his voice. "Because you reported a crime with a high degree of certainty. We need to eliminate all possibilities." I stayed silent. Sometimes the most powerful move is letting someone talk themselves into a corner. As the officers headed toward the garage, Ethan glanced at me. Not with anger. Not with hatred. With panic. If you're still here with me right now, take a second, subscribe to the channel, and share this story. Not because of me, but because moments like this remind us how quickly trust can turn, and how important it is to recognize the signs before it's too late. The garage door creaked open, and that's when everything finally fell apart. When the truth surfaced, the officer unzipped the gym bag. He didn't rush. He didn't hesitate. His hand went in, then came out holding the package. Plastic, white powder, sealed tight. The garage went silent. Ethan took one step back. "That's not mine," he whispered, voice cracking. "He put it there. He's trying to frame me." The officer looked at him steadily. "Then explain something for me." He held up the package. "Why did you tell us to look in your father's backpack and not your car?" That's when Ethan broke, and that's when I knew it was over. After the handcuffs closed, the sound of the handcuffs was quieter than I expected. A soft metallic click. Final, almost polite. Ethan didn't resist. He didn't shout anymore. The fight drained out of him the second the cuffs locked around his wrists, like someone had pulled a plug and let everything inside leak out onto the concrete floor. He looked smaller standing there in the garage. Younger. For a split second, I saw flashes of the boy he used to be, the one who used to sit on my shoulders at parades, the one who cried when he scraped his knees, the one who called for his mom when he had nightmares. Then the officer gently guided him toward the patrol car, and that boy vanished again. Ethan didn't look at me as they led him away. That hurt more than if he had. The garage felt unnaturally quiet once the engines started and the cars pulled away. The door remained open, letting in cold air that smelled like oil and morning dew. I stood there alone, hands at my sides, unsure what to do with them now that the danger had passed. One of the officers stayed behind to take a statement. He asked questions in a calm, professional voice, like this was just another case file. To him, it probably was. To me, it felt like the end of a life I thought I understood. When the officer finally left, I closed the garage door and leaned against it. I didn't cry. I didn't feel relief. I just felt empty, and I knew this emptiness was going to follow me for a long time. The courtroom didn't feel like justice. Courtrooms are colder than they look on television. The benches were hard. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and old paper. I sat in the back row, hands folded, staring at the seal on the wall like it might tell me how a father ends up here watching his own son stand accused. Ethan wore an orange jumpsuit that didn't fit him right. The color drained what little life remained in his face. When he was led in, shackles clinking softly, he finally looked at me. Just once. There was no anger in his eyes now. No calculation. Just something hollow and frightened, like a child who'd run too far from home and didn't know how to come back. The prosecutor spoke calmly, methodically. Evidence. Phone records. The package. The false report. Each word landed with precision, stripping away every excuse Ethan had clung to. His lawyer talked about grief, about bad decisions, about a young man who lost his mother and spiraled. I didn't interrupt. Both sides were telling the truth. That didn't make either version easier to hear. When the judge asked if Ethan had anything to say, he stood slowly. His hands shook. "I never meant to hurt you, Dad," he said, voice barely holding together. I just didn't know what else to do. I believed him, and I also knew it didn't change anything. The gavel came down. The sound echoed longer than it should have. As they led him away, I stayed seated. Some endings don't feel like justice. They just feel final. The house felt different after that. The house didn't change after the trial. The furniture stayed where it was. The pictures on the wall didn't move. Linda's favorite mug still sat in the back of the cabinet, untouched. But the silence did. It pressed down heavier than before, no longer awkward or tense, just permanent. The kind of quiet that doesn't expect anyone else to walk through the door. I stopped cooking full meals. There was no point. I ate standing up most nights, leaning against the counter, staring out the window at a street that didn't know what had happened inside these walls. Ethan's room stayed closed. I didn't go in. Not out of anger, out of preservation. Some doors, once opened, don't close again. Mail piled up on the table. Legal notices. Bank statements. Letters with his name on them that I didn't open. I stacked them neatly, like organizing paperwork might somehow organize the mess inside me. Sleep came in fragments. I'd wake up before dawn, heart steady but mind restless, replaying moments I wished I'd handled differently. Not the arrest, not the courtroom, the smaller moments. The dinners I didn't push harder, the excuses I accepted too easily, the instincts I ignored because they were inconvenient. One morning, standing in the hallway, I caught my reflection in the mirror and barely recognized the man staring back. That's when I understood something quietly but clearly. Staying here wouldn't heal me. It would only keep reopening the same wound. And for the first time since everything fell apart, I allowed myself to consider leaving. The day I decided to let it go. I didn't make the decision all at once. It came quietly, spread out over small moments that stacked on top of each other until staying felt heavier than leaving. It was the way I avoided the hallway at night. The way I reached for my phone and realized there was no one left to call. The way the house echoed even when I spoke out loud. One afternoon, I stood in the living room and looked around, not as a man remembering, but as a man measuring what he could carry forward. The couch where Linda and I used to sit. The scratch on the wall from when Ethan was 8 and thought he could move furniture by himself. The marks of a life that no longer existed. I didn't feel dramatic about it. I felt tired, so I called a realtor. She spoke gently. Asked if I was sure. I told her I was. When she came by to take photos, I stepped outside and let her do her job without me hovering. That felt symbolic, somehow letting someone else walk through my life while I stood at a distance. That night, I packed my first box. Not everything, just the essentials. Clothes, documents, a few photographs. The rest could wait. As I taped the box shut, I realized something I hadn't expected. I wasn't running away. I was choosing to survive. And for the first time in months, that choice didn't feel selfish. It felt necessary, learning what quiet really means. My new apartment didn't echo. That was the first thing I noticed. It was smaller, tucked against the edge of town, with a narrow balcony that faced a line of trees instead of a street. No memories clung to the walls. No history waited in corners. Just clean space and quiet that didn't accuse me of anything. The first night there, I slept straight through until morning. No dreams, no sudden waking, no replaying moments I wished I could rewrite. I started walking again, this time without a route. Some days I went toward the river. Other days, I just followed sidewalks until I felt tired enough to stop. I learned which cafe brewed coffee strong enough to taste like effort, not comfort. I learned which bench caught the best afternoon sun. Freedom, I realized, isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't celebrate. It just lets you breathe. One afternoon, while sitting alone with a cup of coffee cooling between my hands, it hit me how close I'd come to losing all of this, not just the apartment or my savings, but the chance to grow old on my own terms. If you're listening right now and this part resonates with you, consider subscribing and sharing this story. Not for numbers, but because someone out there may be standing where I once stood, unsure if choosing themselves is allowed. It is. I still thought about Ethan. Not every day, but often enough. The thoughts no longer burned. They simply existed. And for the first time, I understood something clearly. Healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means finally living without fear. The letters I never opened. The letters started arriving a month after I moved. Plain envelopes. My name, written in handwriting I recognized instantly. Ethan's. Careful. Controlled. Like every word had been practiced before it ever touched paper. I didn't open them. I stacked them neatly on the corner of my desk, telling myself I'd read them when I was ready. Days passed. Then weeks. The stack grew thicker, heavier not in weight, but in meaning. Sometimes, late at night, I'd pick one up and turn it over in my hands. I wondered what he'd written. Apologies, maybe. Explanations. Promises he didn't yet understand he couldn't keep. People like to believe forgiveness is a door you either open or keep shut. The truth is more complicated. Forgiveness doesn't always mean reconnection. It doesn't always mean reconciliation. Sometimes, forgiveness is simply choosing not to let anger follow you into the rest of your life. One evening, as rain tapped softly against the balcony door, I gathered the letters and placed them in a drawer. Not the trash, not the fire, just away. I wasn't rejecting my son. I was protecting the fragile peace I'd fought too hard to earn. I hoped Ethan would change. I truly did. But hope, I'd learned, is not a plan, and love is not a shield against consequences. As I closed the drawer, I felt something settle inside me. Not closure, but acceptance. And for now, that was enough. What love is not. For a long time, I confused love with endurance. I thought loving someone meant absorbing their mistakes, carrying their burdens, and standing still no matter how much damage they caused. I believed that if I held on long enough, loved hard enough, things would eventually correct themselves. That belief nearly cost me everything. Love is not silence when something feels wrong. Love is not sacrifice without limits. And love is not allowing yourself to be destroyed just so someone else doesn't have to face the consequences of their choices. That was the hardest truth to accept. I loved my son. I still do. But love doesn't mean surrendering your life to someone who sees that love as leverage. It doesn't mean ignoring your instincts because acknowledging them would be painful or inconvenient. Real love requires clarity. It requires boundaries. And sometimes, it requires distance. I realized that protecting myself wasn't an act of betrayal, it was an act of respect. Respect for the life I'd built, for the years I had left, and for the version of myself that deserved peace after decades of responsibility. Ethan's choices were his own. So were mine. I didn't stop being his father that day. But I did stop being his shield. And strangely enough, that was the most honest form of love I had left to give. Looking back, without flinching, I don't replay that morning anymore. Not the backpack, not the knock on the door, not even the moment everything fell apart. Those memories have settled into place, like old photographs stored away, not erased, but no longer sharp enough to hurt. I look back now without flinching. I see a man who trusted too much, then learned too late but learned nonetheless. I see a father who faced an impossible choice and chose to live with it rather than die from it. Some chapters don't end with forgiveness. They end with understanding. And sometimes, that's the only kind of peace we're meant to have. The life I chose to keep. I still carry that backpack sometimes. Not because I need it, but because it reminds me of the day I chose myself. I walk slower now. I listen more. I pay attention to the quiet moments most people rush past. Morning light on the floor. The sound of coffee brewing. The simple relief of knowing no one is waiting to take something from me. I don't know who my son will become after this chapter of his life. That's no longer something I can control. What I do know is this love that costs you your dignity, your freedom, and your future isn't love, it's surrender. And I'm done surrendering. If you've stayed with me until this moment, I want to thank you not as a viewer, but as a fellow human being who understands how fragile trust can be, especially within family. Now I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? What part of this story stayed with you the most? Have you ever been forced to choose between protecting someone you love and protecting yourself? Share your thoughts in the comments. This channel isn't just about stories, it's about the things we carry quietly and the courage it takes to put them down. If this story moved you, please subscribe and share it with someone who might need to hear it. You never know whose life might change because they listened one more minute. In the next video, I'll tell another story Different people, different betrayal, but the same hard truth. Sometimes survival doesn't look heroic. It just looks honest. Until then, take care of yourself. And remember, noticing the truth is the first step toward freedom.